Welcome to ASSAT Analysts, the debate game show where the points definitely matter and we take things way too seriously. My name is Josh Johnson, and I'm joined here with my roommates, Nathaniel Jackson.
Yo.
And Kyle Jennis.
Howdy.
Stay tuned to find out who truly is the king of pulling random facts and arguments right out of their ass.
Welcome to this Monday's Parlay episode. This is our book episode of the month, so we will all be talking about a book, rating it out of 10, but we'll get to that. First of all, we are joined by special guest, Dr. Donald Jackson.
Nice, Donald. I like that.
Who, for our guest, is actually my father. So, based off the topics that we were talking about today, that could incite some very interesting conversations. So,
and probably some interesting looks as well for all of us here.
Oh, yeah.
I seem to be strategically placed across from him, so yes.
But this is going to be fun. But first of all, we're talking about a book. The book this month that we all read is Ikigai, The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life, written by Hector Garcia and Francesc Miralles. So it is a very interesting book, a pretty short read. It's less than 200 pages.
When was it published?
2016, I think. So, and there's a pretty big age gap, I believe, between the authors, which we actually found out during our Patreon episode.
Go subscribe. You should.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Francesc Miralles, born 1968, versus Hector Garcia, 1981.
That's
13. I don't know if that's when they were born or if that's when they became an author. Could be either or. The book does not clarify.
I believe, considering that it's focused on age, that's probably the year they were born.
Probably. That would make sense.
Yeah.
But
that's 13 years. That's a pretty decent age gap.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
My parents had the same age gap.
Nice.
We'll get into that later.
That's the bonus episode.
All right. So let's go around. Let's reveal what we rated the book. Kyle, what'd you rate the book?
I gave it a 7 out of 10.
Josh?
I gave it a 7.7.
Yeah. I gave it a 5.5.
And I gave it a 5.
All right.
Wow.
Pretty interesting. So my father and I both at 5, and Josh and Kyle both in the 7s. So I'll preface this real quick. This is kind of interesting because I've read a couple like self-improvement, knowledge-based books. My father has read many. And then we have Kyle and Josh, who have both admitted to me that this is really the first kind of book that they've read like this. So I'm kind of interested in you guys' like perspective as someone who's never read a self-improvement style book.
Yeah, I mostly read fiction. So I liked it because it was different from what I normally read. But I think that it spoke to me, I guess, in kind of the place at life that I am right now and trying to figure out where I am. I'm just kind of floating. And so it was really helpful for me to kind of put some things into perspective and kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's a lot of good moments in this book that talk about like finding yourself, finding your Ikigai, which we'll get into what that means later. But it is a very, I think, well-written book. I gave it a 5.5 purely from the standpoint that the main topic of the book, and it's not really the main topic, but the theme of the book is trying to find out why certain people in the world have lived as long as they have. And it revolves around a city in Japan where they have some supercentenarians, which means that they lived over 110 years of age. And that's not really something personally that I'm super interested in. Finding out why these people lived so long is cool. It's interesting information, I guess, but a lot of the content in the book didn't really necessarily apply to me, whereas there are certain chapters in the book that did heavily apply to me, like when I think it's chapter 5 when it's talking about like flow state and how to get into a flow state and how important that is. That was really cool, and I thought that a lot of that was something that I need to work on implementing. But then all of chapter 6 or whatever chapter it is just accounts of all these people who've lived for so long. And most of them are like, well, I don't eat meat, or, I just eat and sleep a lot. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
I
mean, that does make sense. It doesn't totally, like, not all of them, like, discussed a real, like, purpose or whatever, but it's, like, something that it's, like, the secret to life, like, which is part of living the long life that they have. It's, like, not only finding a purpose, but having good habits that help you best use your body to live that long.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, Dr. Donald Jackson?
With respect to the score that I gave it, or the book in general, I liked parts of it. And I think what the three of you have shouted out is just there are always takeaways from any kind of publication where you can say, you know what, that's a nugget of truth for me. I'd like to incorporate that into my life. But if you look at this book or any kind of self-help book, you just always run the risk of saying, here's the cookie cutter you must fit your life into. And I always get a little concerned about that from a psychological perspective, that you can run afoul of that if, as an example, we bought this book and gave it to all of our friends and all our family and says, this is the key to life. It inevitably won't fit somebody. And so if you kind of treat it as gospel, so to speak, or the truth or the way to something, and then that person doesn't resonate with it, I get concerned that then they find themselves on the outside looking in saying, what's wrong with me? Why am I different? Why doesn't this speak to me? Etc. Again, some really, I think, and I enjoyed reading it. I'm probably going to get some friends of mine a copy of it for Christmas or something. And because I think it does bring to light and provide language for things that sometimes we think about. But a 5 because of that. And a 5 also because I was very confused in the beginning why our authors went to just looking at psychoanalysis and logotherapy and this idea of kind of a Freudian approach versus a Viktor Frankl approach. And there's many, many, many more types or models of working with people and therapy, systemic and otherwise. So I was confused why we chart that in the book, why we go there in the beginning and highlight those differences. So then I was thinking, well, is this a book about psychology and mental health? Well, then this should take a different tact. But it really wasn't about that. So I left those early chapters of that, and I was just trying to set a foundation for where the book was going. I know that, but thinking, I'm not sure that made sense. I'm not sure why you pick those two therapy types, psychoanalysis, logotherapy, and you focus on those when in today's view of therapy, those are older models. Can I say it that way as the old guy around the table?
Sure.
Older models of therapies, some of which you have a struggle to dig deep into research and find efficacy that this actually works. So
there was a third form of therapy that they talked about. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Morita therapy, I think, was what it was.
I have a note on that somewhere, actually.
Yeah.
There's the 4 phases of it where it starts from, like, pure isolation, and then eventually, like, after a week or 10 days, like, you go up to the next one until finally you're back into the real world or whatever.
that's the therapy of doing, right? So the idea there is basically, contemplation, but then moving forward from contemplation and doing, putting what you're processing into action. So that made sense. Again, it all made sense, but why limit the scope?
Yeah.
You could have added, if the deep dive was, hey, therapy's not going to solve everything, here's some examples. And I'm not saying the author said that, but if that's why you start there, then you could have added 50 more pages of this book and really done a comprehensive view of some of that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think so because, like you mentioned, that the reason that they brought that stuff up in the first place was to kind of set the foundation of, where the book was going.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if they only picked those two and didn't go as in depth because they wanted it just to be kind of a baseline rather than being, this is a book about, psychology and therapy.
Sure. Probably, Josh. And the reality for me is I have my own bias and lens because of my background, and graduate degrees in this field and all that good stuff. And so like a singer who observes another singer and is always critical of that process, you know, a writer that observes other writers and says, well, I wouldn't have written that sentence that way. I'm kind of doing the same thing. I get it.
Yeah, well, which is part of the reason that we were excited to have you on for this book episode, because you would be able to bring that knowledge to the table. Whereas, you know, even though Nathaniel has read, you know, some more of these books, I think most of us are, I would say, laymen when it comes to psychoanalysis and therapy and things like that. So having the expert opinion is definitely nice to have at the table.
If you had to guess or take a guess why they chose those two and then added Morita in the next chapter, what would that guess be?
Not really sure. I kept wondering, why are we touching on Frankl's work, and why are we touching on psychoanalysis? You know, that they call out that, you know, Frankl's work, logotherapy, has room for faith, so a belief system bigger than yourself. Psychoanalysis doesn't make room for that. They even chart that out, right? And I don't know, somewhere in the first 30 or 40 pages, they chart that out. So I don't know. It was interesting.
Yeah, I actually remember when I first started reading this book, before we even picked to decide to do this for an episode, I actually was reading that and I was like, I don't know if I agree with this entirely. This is very interesting. And I actually sent a text to Dad. It was like, hey, what are your thoughts on these two forms of therapy? And he was like, outdated. Why? It was like,
And
oh,
there's my bias, right?
yeah, it was very interesting. But I think the chapter following that was about flow.
Yeah, it was like 4 or 5 or something.
Yeah, and I really liked that chapter.
Yep.
I did too, actually, yeah.
It was very interesting. And, you know, being in a state of flow while doing work is something that I think we've all experienced at some point doing something. He even in the book talks about how, you know, you can achieve some sort of flow when playing video games or board games. And it's like, okay, yeah, you kind of lose track of time, things happen. And then he talks about, well, here are some reasons you might not be achieving flow in something that you want to be. That was very impactful for me, because as someone who is a musician, someone who likes to think of himself as a creative, who likes to write, who likes to do all these things, there are many times where I sit down and try and start, and I just can't seem to achieve that state of flow. So kind of hearing some of the this is why you might not be, this is, I think he talks about another author, it might have been a poet, but he said, he quoted someone saying, you know, oftentimes I write better than I can. And he quotes that as him explaining, this is me writing because I've reached a state of flow. I'm not this good a writer outside of that, which I thought was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for context, the flow is what would be more easily recognizable in athletes as like the zone.
Yeah.
So that.
Yeah, he describes it in the book as a state of being when you kind of lose track of time and the rest of the things around you are no longer bothering you, or
intense focus and concentration.
Yeah.
It's just like being in the moment about this one specific thing. So, for instance, like if Nate's writing a piano progression or some big symphonic piece, or I'm writing a guitar riff, and I'm just like, oh, you know, it goes here, and I can visualize everything, like where it's going. It's just like, that's the flow, where it's just, there's a clear vision in front of us, and we're moving straight towards it, and nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did find in that chapter when he kind of compares productivity between people that multitask, even people that successfully, or I guess what would be considered successfully multitask, where they're able to kind of do multiple, I mean, that's the definition of multitask. I thought it was interesting because there are like a lot of jobs that people have nowadays where you do kind of have to multitask and be looking at multiple screens and doing different things, as opposed to being able to focus on specific tasks and just kind of knock those out. So it was interesting to see kind of how multitasking is not nearly as productive as it's believed to be.
Multitasking in work is a very Western thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that like it does happen in the rest of the world, but not nearly as much as it does in Western countries. Like in Japan, you have one task. You know, you are sitting at a table. If you're a mangaka and you're drawing, that's all you do. You sit there, you draw for hours upon hours upon hours. So in those Eastern countries where that is kind of more so how they work, it is much easier for them to achieve a state of flow because, and he even describes it in the book, being able to do this, it's a muscle. You have to train it, and it becomes easier and it becomes more efficient, which is something that I feel like when I was younger, I was actually better at. And that is something that I think modern schools actually do a really good job of, is teaching you how to focus on one task at a time. And as I've gotten older, gone to different schools, and you start to think, oh, I can do this and this at the same time. I can listen to music and work on this at the same time. I can check Instagram for a couple seconds and then get back to work. No, you can't.
It's not that easy.
Yeah.
Like for me, when I'm at work, I'm very much like, I've even told my managers, I'm like, listen, just give me a list of stuff to do from most important to least important, and just tell me, hey, do these first, then you can go to these when these are done. It seems very monotonous, but it's organized and structured, and that is exactly how my brain works. So I'm all for that. I cannot multitask.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
No, I was just going to ask, to be Captain Obvious for a moment, what are we defining as multitask? Because there are studies that suggest that some creatives, as an example, actually need at least some level of multitasking to focus. As an example, if you're a student or were a student and you found yourself doodling a lot, studies have actually shown that the exercise of doodling actually focuses the brain on what's being said. Excuse me. So you're in class, you're listening to the lecture, and you're doodling. The teacher and others may think you're checking out, but it's actually a way to preoccupy the parts of the brain that otherwise would go to other thoughts, feelings, things like that. And by putting it on the page, the rest of your mental ability is focused on the speaker. So multitasking, if it's the biggest, broadest definition, that we can think of probably examples where it's a good idea and a bad idea, and depending on your personality style, your ability to focus, all those things. But if we're talking narrow kind of, hey, work these two computer screens, be on the phone at the same time, and oh, by the way, place an order over here for that, okay, that gets a little crazy making for some personalities, right? Right, but yeah, but Josh, you're right. You mentioned earlier, that's part of the workspace, and there's a lot of jobs in today's job market where they're essentially looking for people who can keep a lot of plates spinning in the air. Mm-hmm. And inevitably something falls.
Yeah, and you just have to make sure that you're prioritizing things within that space, that if you are going to have to drop one thing, that it's, something that can...
To Kyle's point, drop the least important thing.
Yeah, or drop the thing that...
first, right?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Get the big things done, then as those are done, you can go to the small things.
Yeah, or toss a plate up in the air and come back and catch it later, but yeah.
Be like Peter Parker from the first Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
Except it might not be that perfect when you catch the plate back.
No, it won't be.
One can dream. One can dream. The next chapter was a bunch of accounts. I think that was the next chapter. A bunch of accounts from super centenarians.
Or was it the yoga chapter, or there was one chapter that had a lot of the diagrams of...
Yeah, the yoga and the exercise was kind of towards the end.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think this one was accounts of why it was that they had lived so long. And
okay.
What did you guys think about that? Because I mean, some of the answers were just cheesy, I've never eaten meat. I love that answer. That made me laugh.
Well, I mean, the reality of it is, I don't think they know why they've lived this long. That's one of them literally said, "I just haven't died yet." He's like,
yeah,
I'm not,
pretty much.
I'm not necessarily trying. I didn't live this life with the goal of, I mean, obviously you live your life with the goal of staying alive, but he didn't try to say, I want to make it to, 115.
Yeah.
I think he just kept doing things day to day that and that really, I think, is what it boils down to for most of them, was they just had a reason to live,
Yeah.
and
Something to keep them active, really. Because, I mean, a lot of these old people, like, still just not intense games, but they'll go out and do, like, just outdoor games or whatever. Just like they had some, it wasn't like soccer, but they would have like sports or some sort of I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, it was like, I forget what they called it. I think they called it like yarn ball or something, or yard ball.
Yeah.
But it sounded like croquet / bocce ball kind of game.
And like there are these people that are easily like 80 or 90 years old and still playing like they're our age. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, at 80 years old, my grandmother was in a retirement home and, would have to have people come check on her every so often. I'm like, these guys are just doing stuff like it's nothing. I'm like, what?
I find it interesting when they're going through all the different people and they're talking about how long they lived and when they passed. It was very interesting that a lot of them lived on their own until they were 110 years old. And then it was like, okay, and then they were put into a community home.
Right.
And I do like how, well, let's talk about that for a second. Just the idea of community that they really push on early on in the book.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about, I forget what they called it. There was this concept of...
Oh, I got it. It's very early, like page 4. It's, I really hope I pronounce this correct. Icharriba Chode, the second note right there.
That looks right.
Basically, it means... I'm very sorry for butchering this again. Basically, it means treat everyone like a brother, even if you've never met them before.
Yeah. Yep. I do think that is very important because you can't live a fulfilled life without being part of a community. And I think that's really what it boils down to. They talk about exercise, they talk about diet in this book, but I think really the most important aspect to probably living is being fulfilled, and you do that by having a strong community.
Yeah, they talked about what was it, Mori or something like that. It was like the community clubs where they would like fund share with each other.
I love that concept. That is very, very cool. It's like, we all pay this much into our community share. If someone is struggling, then we give them a little money. If it's just a way of spreading the wealth and taking care of each other.
Before Kickstarter, before GoFundMe.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, and that was the cool thing, was that it wasn't something that was established by, any governing body or anything like that. It was just like neighborhoods, or, groups of kind of extended family and things like that would pull money together. And what was it? It was like once a year they'd put in a certain amount of money, or it was like every month or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then if one of the people needed the money for, the farmers had a bad harvest that year, or, there was a lot of rain or something and it damaged somebody's house, just any kind of unexpected kind of emergency, that money would be allocated to that person.
It's basically like a communal savings account / emergency fund, pretty much.
Yeah.
Which is really cool because a lot of people...
Socialism.
Yeah.
I was waiting for it.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's realistically some of the highest, most stressful moments or situations that people find themselves in, especially in America, is when you are financially really tight and something bad happens that you really don't know how you're going to get the money for it. Those are not fun moments. And so having something like that, a community where, oh, hey, there's a fund for that, you're taking care of, the community's got your back. That is a very, very cool and huge stress relieving moment. So,
well, go back, we've seen this in our culture. It's just, we need some reminding, and I need some reminding. It's before my generation as well, right? So think about the concept of barn raisings. So if you go back 200 years, you go back 150 years, wasn't uncommon for a family who needed a barn because, in largely somewhat pre-industrial agricultural society where you're living off your own land, et cetera, a barn is a huge, important key to your success. You couldn't just build that on your own. You couldn't hire a construction company to come in. You couldn't do all of that. And so a barn raising was a community event. It was an event where people in the community came together to help get your barn built. And they did it because when it was time to help them, you went and helped them. It's today, in a very, very, very small way, Habitat for Humanity is built on that, right? People come together. We've had to turn it into charity, but people come together. They build something for someone who could otherwise not have it themselves, by themselves, and they contribute to that. And if you're a recipient of a Habitat for Humanity home, part of the requirement for you is to pay it forward to another family. And so there are pieces of that in our culture. We just don't think about it much anymore because we're too busy arguing. You know?
Yeah. Well, and I know there are at least some churches where there's a similar thing like that. Part of the tithe is set away for people in the community that need help. I know there was a couple years ago, there was a family in the community whose house burned down. So the church gave them, even it wasn't nearly enough to, replace the items that were lost, but it was at least enough to keep them afloat while they were able to figure out insurance and other things. So
I'm going to paraphrase it poorly, but I was watching the news the other night, and there was a story about Vince Gill giving band instruments to the high school in Waverly. That Waverly was devastated by the floods that happened, and Vince was there and donated the instruments, I think with KHS as a partner, and they were able to do a lot of that. And as they were interviewing him, he just highlighted, he said, this is the stuff we should be doing all the time. It shouldn't take a disaster for us to be there for each other, to live in community. Again, I'm paraphrasing him poorly, but his concept was, and his thought was, this is what we should be good human beings to each other. This is what we should be doing if we have it and are able to do it.
compassion.
Yeah.
Yep.
What an idea.
Foreshadowing.
Oh, yeah.
Can I ask a question of you guys?
Yeah.
So I'm at a different generation, right? We've already established I'm Nathaniel's dad. So this whole living to 110 beyond suddenly has more appeal because that means I'm only halfway through, and that feels exciting to me.
There you go.
Although I've probably not done the best of getting to the halfway point in good place, but that's a discussion aside. How much of personal belief is involved in this? This is the part that intrigued me about the book, was just thinking about these folks that have lived a very long time. Community is important. I think how they live their life is very important, meaning the day-to-day activities. It is important to consume healthy food. It is important to be active. But, I've joked around for years, and I've rightfully so, because I can be a little self-deprecating, I've rightfully so been called out on it every once in a while, that I just kid around about being an old man. But how much of that mindset creeps in? So here in my 50s, when something happens and maybe physically I'm not as active as I need to be or something else, I just settle into the recliner with the remote and I get a little too sedentary. And before you know it, I can't get to 110. And we've all bought the belief, and we've become spectators of life, and we consume what's on the television and the iPad and the phone simultaneously, and we can't just focus on something, let alone turn it all off and perhaps have a little community around a campfire. So as you guys, who are much younger than me, sit and think about your life and what it's going to look like in 50 years, how do we change this? I don't know if my generation can, but maybe that's my own defeatist attitude. How do you change it? How do you say, let's get off the dang devices and let's start living like 3D lives with each other?
I mean, one thing that actually you had me do recently was set time limits. Like set time limits for which you can spend on certain, even just like 1 or 2 apps, like just to limit your time on those and just start slowly being like, all right, I have to go out. Like, and actually you'll see accountability rules on the board. Basically it's just small little things to be like, all right, this is time to be, or not to do this. This is time to do this. I think that's one of the smallest things, but one of the most important things I think we can do is just set small things, accountability rules, be like, all right, on this day, I'm not going to do this. On this day, I am going to do this. So like for me, it's on the board, it says gym. For me, I like hiking a little bit more. It's for me to get outside and go do something, just worry about the trail ahead of me and nothing else. that's pretty much, that's what I like to do to like refresh my brain, is just go outside and just plow ahead, get to my trail and go.
Yeah, and on my accountability, it says gym 6 times per week. Because there has been times in my life where I don't go to the gym and times in my life where I do. And when I do, I'm far happier. So that's just, I've noticed that about myself. It's something that I want to imply to my life. And I need people to keep me accountable occasionally. There are mornings when all I want to do is sleep in. But if someone says, hey, no, you said gym 6 times a week. Come on, let's go. Then I'm going to go. And yeah, like you were saying, I was addicted to my phone. I still am to some extent. I was spending 6 hours a day on my phone. And part of that, I use it for work. So that was part of it. But, you know, I spent a lot of time on Instagram. You also
just bought this new iPad.
Which is now to take place of my phone at work. But you know, I was spending a lot of time on Instagram, and that would just be, I would wake up, I'd scroll for 20 minutes before I'd get dressed and go to the gym. Well, there was no need to do that. So that's
20 minutes you could have spent either getting ready to go to the gym or just doing something else at the gym.
Yeah, I could have already been at the gym and then come back and had more time to get ready for work and more time to hang out and, you know, read or whatever. So I actually went up to Kyle and said, hey, Kyle, don't tell me what this passcode is, but set a passcode right now. He said, what am I doing? I was like, oh, you're just locking social media on my phone.
And I said, okay.
Yeah. And
I just did it. I was like, I'm going to hold him accountable.
I got 1 minute of social media time a day. 1 minute. That's it. And if
what have you missed?
Nothing.
Really nothing.
I've realized how addicted to my phone I was, because I'll be scrolling through Instagram. 1 minute will come. I'll hit 1 more minute, because that's all you get. Hit 1 more minute, and then, you know, the rest of the day I'll pick it up, click on Instagram. Oh, it's locked. Crap. Put it back in my pocket.
Put it away.
5 minutes later, phone, Instagram. Oh, yeah. I don't have any time left. And I probably pick up my phone 40, 50 times a day. And I'm hoping over time, keeping it like this, I'll eventually just not need it, and I'll stop being addicted, stop going for that every time I'm bored.
Let me sharpen my follow-up question to you. What community do you miss? Because isn't that what social media is supposed to be?
Yeah.
So as somebody who, I would not consider myself addicted to my phone. I realistically don't look at it very often. I'm terrible with social media, which is a blessing now that I am kind of on the other side of things a little bit and realize what a detriment it can be. So that's not necessarily something that has personally affected me. I do spend a lot of time on YouTube.
Same.
But so I think to kind of initially answer your question, which was how do we change that and get back into the community? And I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking, especially after this past year and a half, 2 years that we've had, where everybody was like, you couldn't go outside and have that 3D communication. And I think the answer is just to do it. You know, like we can set rules for ourselves and we can write things on the board and we can hold each other accountable to actually doing it. But at the end of the day, we just need to do it. You know, that's waking up and going to the gym. That's deciding that you're going to join a local sports league just so you get out and run around on Thursdays, or deciding that, you know, Friday mornings you're going to go on a hike and that's just what you're going to do. And as soon as you take those first 3 steps, I mean,
everything else
you're already out there.
Yeah,
exactly. So I think it is just doing it, and being able to change that mindset of, you know, like the example you gave of, you know, sitting down in front of the TV and just being sedentary. I think the law of inertia works with humans as well, and being able to get in that flow of doing.
We certainly like to take the path of least resistance, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Well, and an object in motion stays in motion, and so you know, if you can take those first 3 steps,
stays at rest.
Yeah. So if you can take those first 3 steps, then I think that you can, you know, you can keep moving and you can keep doing that. and it starts by setting those rules and holding each other accountable to take that initial push, and setting realistic goals for yourself. Nathaniel's, we're sitting right in front of a whiteboard that has kind of all these rules for us on there. Nathaniel's is gym 6 times a week. Mine is 3 times a week, because I realized that if I set the goal of 6 times a week, I'm going to fall short of that, and it's not going to be helpful at all. So eventually, someday, it probably will make it up to 6 times a week, fingers crossed. But, and the other thing is that doesn't necessarily, for me, that means going to the gym and doing something, whether that's, like I mentioned, I watch a lot of YouTube. So oftentimes what I'll do is, I'm not tired after work. I still have some energy. I'm just going to go to the gym, and the time that I'm spending watching YouTube, I'm walking on the treadmill. And so it's not necessarily going to the gym and pumping iron, but it is getting out and doing something active.
Yeah, and setting expectations, that you can meet, and then occasionally doing more is more beneficial than setting an expectation for yourself that is really hard to hit and not hitting it. And they actually talk about that in the book. When they're talking about reaching a state of flow, he talks about setting the correct amount of challenge. And he says to just a slight amount of challenge and you can reach flow. Too much challenge and you're going to cause yourself to be anxious and you're going to cause anxiety. Not enough flow or not enough challenge and you're going to be bored and you're going to lose interest. So that's something that's important in everything that you do, is understanding, okay, this is too challenging. I'm just going to get stressed out and anxious. So what is the next thing I can do to get better, to improve, to go further, and then take that next step? Because I'm not up to that challenge yet. So,
yeah. So I think one of the biggest takeaways from the book for me, and the reason I did rate it the highest at the table, was because I think it reinforced some things that I already knew, but didn't want to kind of admit to myself, of the reason that people live longer and live healthier is because they have a reason to live. And so it kind of forced me to be a little introspective and try to figure out what it is that I'm living for, because I'm kind of at that quarter life crisis age, where I am out of school for a couple years and working a job, but just kind of doing things day to day without any real kind of goals. And so it forced me to kind of take a look at that and ask myself some of those hard questions and make some changes in my day to day. One of the things that I've been focusing on is the 80% rule about eating in there. And so for me, that's been, reducing snacking and eating smaller meals. And I can notice a difference in the way that I feel when doing that. Because over the past probably 3 years, I've only consistently eaten maybe one meal a day, but that one meal was
huge.
Yes. I would just eat a very large dinner. And not feel good after eating, but then for the rest of the day, wasn't necessarily hungry, but just wasn't. Yeah. So
you don't want food when you eat that much.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, food's the last thing I want. So for the rest of the day, you're just like, ugh.
Yeah. So I think I've been eating more consistent, smaller meals now, and that has, even just for the past week and a half that I've been doing that, I can already kind of notice a difference in my energy levels, and so.
So you're illustrating, even though I gave it the lowest score at the table,
Mm-hmm.
I still said this is a book that I would probably buy for people, I would give to people, because like you take a couple of things out of this and you apply it to your life, and it will change you.
Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself is worth it, even if I have my own bias and lens that I'm looking at it through and going, I'm not so sure about X or Y or whatever. I think the thing that resonated most, for 3 things. One is that sense of community. I do like they began the book talking about the blue zones. I think there's more work to be done researching those blue zones and better understanding why there are pockets on the planet, for whatever reason, people live a healthier, longer life, and to better understand those things, and to recognize that it's not, again, a cookie cutter. What works in Italy doesn't work in Japan. And so how are they doing that where they are? I think that's where research could go with that. But that purpose piece, so, I'm in my 50s, as I mentioned. I'm 55, and I came to the realization a few years ago that I always wanted, when I was your age, you guys, I'm going to sound like an old man for a minute. There's my statement, Kyle, of being an old man. So I always thought finding my purpose meant having like the exact description of what the rest of my life was going to be just written out, so I could just lean into that, like my to-do list, not think so much and go through that. I figured out, and this is just truth for me, it doesn't have to apply to anybody else, but I figured out that my purpose in life is to help other people. So everything I do, if you look at any kind of career thing I've done the last 20 years, it's been to help people. So I went back to school to become a licensed therapist to help people, and I help people. That's what I do, right? I teach. I've been adjunct at a couple universities, still adjunct at one here in town in Nashville, and I've done that for more than 10 years now. I do it to help people learn and grow and become a therapist someday, because I teach in a graduate program. And then in the music industry for the last quarter century of my life, which is my quote unquote, air quotes, day gig, my focus there is to help people. So I figured out along the way for me that my purpose is to help people. And so I can do a lot of different things while still operating in my purpose. And once I had that realization for me, I stopped worrying about having the perfect job in the perfect moment with the perfect title and the description written nice and neat with the to-do list. And when something comes my way, I ask myself, can I help somebody with this? And if I can, it fits my purpose, then I may do it. If I can't help anybody, or if it's self-serving, or it's just about a buck, a lot of times I say no. That's what finding purpose for me has become. You guys will each find your own version of that. Hopefully your listeners will find their own version of that. So it may be a specific thing, or it may be a generalized, hey, this is what I'm constructed to be, however you believe you got constructed. And I'm going to do everything, as long as whatever I'm facing meets that, I can say yes to it, because that fits my purpose.
Can I ask, how old were you when you figured out that purpose?
I was in my 30s for sure, late 30s. Yeah. So I was out of school a long time and reached a point I was a decade into, not quite a decade, I shouldn't say that, 8 years into a music industry career, and was a little stuck in the career path. Didn't feel like I had a lot of options, and really just encountered some great people here in town who are therapists, actually through a church event and some other things that I had an opportunity to experience, and we began a conversation. He became one of my mentors, began a conversation, and so I thought about going back to school, and I did that. So I went back to school in my 30s, got my master's, and then started practicing, still having the music industry thing, but started practicing and have been practicing, for 15 years now, 16 years now. I do feel kind of old.
That's two.
And then after, that's two, 3 strikes and I'm out, right, Josh? And then, had the opportunity to go back and work on my doctorate, because there's always been a part of me that wanted to teach. Mm-hmm. Teaching's helping, so it fits, right? And then when there was a PhD program at the school that I'd done my master's, I went for it.
Okay.
So, but it keeps evolving, and there are moments I want more than my purpose. There are moments I still want, more money, a bigger title, more influence, more guitars, whatever the case may be, right?
Yep.
More guitar pedals. But anyway,
Oh, I've heard you can never have enough.
You cannot, Josh. That's correct. That's a whole nother episode, I believe, at some point.
Yeah.
Woo!
But
that's a doozy.
So there's times even when you know your purpose that you're challenged because you want more. And yet, finding the contentment that I think the book is trying to get us all to is about figuring out how to live in your purpose and then stay in it. I don't know if that answered your question. But.
No, it did. It did, and it's encouraging for me to hear as I think part of the lie that we're kind of told is that you go to school, you get a degree, and then you can go out and you should know what your purpose is. And I think there are a lot of people that do kind of know, what their goal in life, what their purpose in life is at that younger age. But I think there's a lot of our current generation that is just, like I described earlier, kind of floating and a little bit directionless. And so it's encouraging to hear that, you don't have to have that answer kind of right away. And that I believe it's still important to be doing things and working towards something, even if it's not, the big one. And then eventually you will kind of find that if
Let me put my therapy hat on for a second, Josh. Let's reframe that. It's not a lie. The lie is the wrong lie. I think the lie is that everyone should go through the college path or whatever path, and they arrive at this point at the same age roughly where you got it all figured out. And that's the lie, is that it will happen at the same time for everybody. Everybody's on their own path, because the reason I'm calling that out is because if you'd have told me at 25 that I was going to be sitting here around the table with you guys as a licensed therapist, a quarter century in the music industry, an adjunct professor at a university for a decade, I would have laughed at you. I wouldn't have believed any of that was going to happen, right? So I didn't have my nice, neat, come out of college, this is what it looks like path. Some people do, right? Hey, I've always wanted to be a CPA, and they come right out of with an accounting degree, and then they go, and the path is set, and they keep going, and you gosh, God, why can't I have that? The lie is everyone will have that. And then what we believe about ourselves is we start down that shame spiral of, well, what's wrong with me? I should, when we start using should statements, it's a little dangerous, right? I should be there by now. I should have it figured out. I should. So I'm redefining the lie. I'm taking my therapist hat off now, the end.
Okay. No, but I think that, so in a similar way to, like you said, the reason that you gave this book a 5 was because of that very same reason, that if you think this is the one way,
right, and
then it doesn't work for somebody, then they feel on the outside there. So okay. So all right, bookends.
I had a spiritual moment. Not talking about. I had a spiritual moment around that. So I'm younger than you guys, and I'm at this big convention where this prominent youth pastor guy is speaking, and there's tens of thousands of people in this auditorium, and he starts talking about being a virgin, being abstinent until you're married, and he basically starts shaming. This is my view of it. He starts shaming, and saying this is the only way to God's virtue and things. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm not real bright, but I'm a high schooler at this point. I'm thinking to myself, statistically speaking, he's basically telling half the audience you're screwed, literally and figuratively, right?
Wow.
And I'm like, how's that helpful?
Yeah.
How's that helpful?
It's not.
Right?
I don't think it is.
Right?
I'm
I
no
get the
expert,
point
but
of what he was trying to say, kinda. But the way he said it was disastrous. And I thought to myself, that's not how you do it. It's that whole, you should be in this nice, neat path, and anybody that wavers from that, there's something wrong with you, or you're hopeless, or that's a dangerous place societally for us to be. It certainly doesn't build community, going back to the book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you go to that community fund. I'm pretty sure they don't sit around and go, but Kyle, you believe differently than I do, and so therefore the funds aren't for you. But Nathaniel, you believe like I do, so the funds are for you. I don't think they go there.
Yeah.
Right? So community looks and feels different than a lot of the rest of our life. I'm talking too much. I'll be quiet now.
No, I mean, it's valuable input, I think, for all of us, just because it's, like we talked about with the age gap with the authors, they both probably had different views on everything, and having a different perspective is just for me, the point of being, even just doing whatever, like at work, whatever, it's just to learn and just grow. And this, like, if that helps me grow, that's perfectly fine with me.
I think this book for me, kind of opposite to what Josh got out of it, was for me, I have so many goals. In my mind is so pinpoint on these big things. But because I'm so focused in on these one or two things that I just absolutely want to do in my life, I get overwhelmed. I lose energy from that just that feeling of, okay, that's so far off. Oh, but it shouldn't be that far off. Oh, I can do this. Oh, I can't do this. I start to lose myself in my thoughts and not understand how to just focus in on one step. What is one step I can take right now towards that? Okay, take that step. Okay, what's the next step? What can I do right now that will get me a little bit closer to that? And that's what I need to learn to focus on.
It's being in the moment, really.
It's being in the moment, and it's also understanding, the whole thing when it's talking about flow and actually understanding how to hit flow is really not just limited to flow. That's limited to every decision you make in life. If you're making decisions that are way too challenging for your means to be able to accomplish, to be able to overcome, you're never going to get anywhere. You're going to go backwards. But if they're too easy, you're going to fly by. You're going to find yourself not caring about anything. You're just going to be, letting life happen to you instead of being a part of life. So you need to find that middle ground. Where's that slight bit of challenge that I know I have the tools to overcome, that will be fulfilling, that I will enjoy doing. That's the direction I need to go. I don't need to take the easy route. I'll lose interest. I don't need to do something that's so far out of reach that I just get stressed out because I'm not there yet. I need to find that next step and not focus on everything else. So, all right. Well, we're 52 minutes in, exactly.
Nice.
So,
do we want to award points based on
let's
opinions?
Award points. So,
okay.
To our guests, this is how this works.
Okay.
We're each going to go around and reward a point. You
Or
can
we
reward
can
or
withhold.
withhold a point. So there are a couple different ways or reasons that you can reward or withhold your point. You can say, this person changed my mind. I'm going to change my score. Okay. Well, reward that person a point. You can also say, okay, he made a really, really good point that made me stop and think about the argument and the score I gave. I'm not going to change it, but they made me think and second guess myself. Okay, reward that person a point. Or you can just say, no, you're all dumb. I'm smarter than you. I'm keeping my point. That's the other option. So let's start with Kyle.
Oh, goodness. Oh, man.
You want me to start with someone else?
Please.
Okay, I'll go. I'm giving my point to my dad.
Nepotism. Nepotism.
I was waiting on that. No.
He never gives me anything.
Oh, ouch. Ouch.
I felt the pain in
There's
that.
a first time for everything.
No, there are a lot of thoughts I had going through this book and things that I wasn't necessarily clear on, things that I didn't know if I agreed or didn't agree. And some of the stances that you took just helped me to go, okay, I think I do agree with that. Or you're right. That is kind of something that I am unsure of and should be unsure of. So I think you helped to clarify a couple things for me as well as solidify things I was kind of unsure on. So
I think on that note, I'm going to give you my point as well, just because of, again, how much you kind of clarified and opened. Just a lot of this, a lot of the notes I took down was just stuff that stood out to me, but you also reiterated the community aspect, that is very important. The other thing too is that while I understand this is not for everyone, a lot of this did personally resonate with me, and you're like, I get that. Not everyone will acknowledge this the same way, but if it works for you, works for you. So I'll give you my point.
This is what's known as a clean sweep.
Is this the first?
I think it's also, to be fair, he's the only one here that actually understands fully the material that's kind of being. We understand the material and it means different things to us, but you have a background and are able to analyze this book on kind of a different level than the rest of us, and that shows in the position that was taken and the arguments that were made. I do think, for me, I'm probably still going to keep my score at a 7-7, just because, for me, that is my personal review of it. But I do think that whereas before I was, like you had mentioned, probably planning on buying this book for a couple people for Christmas, whereas now I'll be kind of a little more selective of that to the people that I think that it could help or that I would recommend it to. And so that is something that I hadn't thought of before, which part of that is I haven't read books like this before. So I also do kind of want to explore the genre a little bit more. But my point definitely goes to Dr. Donald Jackson.
And I believe, is that the first clean sweep?
No.
By a guest, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So now you get your opportunity to award a point if you'd like to.
I'm giving a point to Josh.
All right.
Giving a point to Josh because you articulated well how the book personally resonated with you, and that made me consider my 5. So it might go a little north. I'm not sure what it would be, but I think hearing a first-person account of somebody that I know who says this resonated with me. Not that you guys didn't, but appreciated how you articulated that. I'm giving you a point for that.
Nice.
All right.
Cool.
Well, that was a fun conversation.
Yeah.
I like this book.
I feel like we all learned a lot. Even if it all wasn't the same thing, we all learned something new about one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I really do like these book episodes, and we are going to keep doing them every month. Nathaniel, do you want to introduce the book that we're reading for this upcoming month that we'll be discussing in December?
Yes, absolutely. So we haven't decided which week in December. It'll either be the second or third week in December. But we will be doing The Gifts of Imperfection by Dr. Brené Brown. So it is another short read. All 3 of the books that we have picked so far have been under 200 pages. So we
promise we'll change that with the next one.
Yeah, we've already picked out a couple of other books. So yes, they are going to get a lot longer. But yeah, we're taking a little easy on ourselves as well as the guests.
Holiday season.
Holiday season.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, we will see you guys on Wednesday for our bullshitter episode.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Be sure to join us on the next episode where we will continue to debate as good friends do. Follow us on Instagram and YouTube and stay up to date on all things Asshat, and to participate in polls and activities throughout the week based on the themes of the upcoming episodes.
We also started a Patreon for those of you who are interested in showing your support in a more direct way. On our Patreon, we have a ton of bonus content, including tier lists, loser dinners, and bonus podcast episodes.
We want to continue making content that makes you think, smile, and especially laugh. And the best way that you guys can help us do that, leave a like or a comment, download and share all these episodes with your friends and family members who you think would enjoy our tomfoolery, our shenanigans, and all those other crazy words that encapsulate our content.